many people might not know is Pachinko is actually Jin Lee's second book. She wrote another book called Free Food for Millionaires that actually came out in 2007, 10 years before Pachinko was published. And I have a hot take here. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite writers. You might have heard of Jin Lee from a little book called Pachinko, which was nominated for the National Book Award in 2017 and was also on a bunch of 2017 Best of Year lists and also won a bunch of awards. And people love this book so much that Apple decided to buy the book and turn it into a TV show that got 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's like near perfect, so it's pretty good. And even celebrities like Dua Lipa can't get enough of Jin Lee and actually want to hang out with her.
It's been too long. I know, we need to hang out more. You have to move to London, I think. I think this is like...
If you want me to,
good.
I will.
Okay, good. This is a good plan.
I mean, can you blame her though? Like, in case you couldn't tell, I'm a huge Jin Lee stan. And this isn't because she's an amazing writer, which she is, but I also think she has done so much to really push forward what kinds of stories that we as Asian American audiences, but also myself as an Asian American writer, get to write about. And for many people, Pachinko was their first introduction to Jin Lee because this book really did blow up when it came out. But what many people might not know is Pachinko is actually Jin Lee's second book. She wrote another book called Free Food for Millionaires that actually came out in 2007, 10 years before Pachinko was published. And I have a hot take here, which is while Pachinko is very clearly a masterpiece for so many different reasons, I do think that Free Food for Millionaires is undervalued and underappreciated in terms of looking at Jin Lee's work as a whole. And so I wanted to create this video, part book review, part love letter to Jin Lee, because again, like, how could you not love her, to help you understand why. And so to do that, I want to start off first by diving into the book, telling you a little bit about it, and some of the reasons why what I think this book does really well. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about Jin Lee's process and actually some of the things that I learned about her when I was researching this video. Free Food for Millionaires is a story about 22-year-old Casey Han. She has just graduated from Princeton University. She's Korean American. She lives in New York City in the 1990s, and she's trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. There's a lot of competing expectations from her. There's the pressure to fit in the social class that she wants to be at, which is upper class, wealthier class. But she comes from a working class background, so there's some class tension there. There's cultural tension because she's Korean American and a lot of the people in her life are not. And then there is the expectation of her family, which she has a very interesting relationship with. It also switches point of view to all of the characters that are in Casey's universe, but then also just side characters that you wouldn't expect to play a big part, like Casey's boyfriend's doorman of the building. It's kind of like if Succession and Inventing Anna and Crazy Rich Asians had a book baby together and was really well written and centered Korean stories, you would get a book like Free Food for Millionaires. And for me, one of the biggest accomplishments of this book is what it does for Asian representation. To me, this book is really about a bunch of complex Asian characters interacting with other complex Asian characters, going on to discover pretty significant challenges about life and also overcoming some pretty severe limitations within the self. And according to Jin Lee, this was actually very intentional.
And I really wanted to have a world in which Asian American characters are central, and then to see how we think about each other and how our relationships look to each other as well as how they actually are.
You might listen to that and be like, okay, cool, like we've had Beef, we've had Parasite, we've had Everything Everywhere All at Once, like we've had a lot of stories that have complex Asian characters. And I would say, yeah, but also like it's 2023 and this was 2007. Like go back and think about what kind of representation we had then. Like, we had Apu from The Simpsons. We had Sandra Oh's character in Grey's Anatomy. We had Ted Chiang publishing some very incredible short stories. But I think this is one of the first things I read, especially thinking about it from the context of when it was published, that really helped push the envelope on what an Asian American story could look like. And so I want to share with you my two favorite characters in the book. The first is our protagonist, Casey Han, which might be another controversial hot take because apparently a lot of people find her super annoying. But I think Casey is extremely relatable. She's smart, she's strong, she is assertive, she's secure in who she is and isn't afraid to stand up for herself and others, but at the same time, she's extremely insecure, especially when she has to navigate a world that she doesn't fully understand. And so I want to read to you one of my favorite descriptions of Casey, which just in 2 lines conveys her whole character. So just for some context, this scene is just describing Casey. I think this is actually the beginning of the first chapter. To save money, she wore her eyeglasses at home, but outside she wore contact lenses to correct her nearsightedness. And to me, this just shows off her character super well, of someone who's struggling against class and race and gender expectations, but also trying to figure out who she is and who she wants to become. Now, the second character that I want to talk to you about is Ted. When I first read the book, I actually really did not like Ted. I thought he was full of himself and someone that was really, really hard to root for. But then I listened to a bunch of interviews from Jin Lee talking about Free Food for Millionaires, and she actually mentioned that Ted was one of her favorite characters. So I had to go back and reread the book to understand why. I think on the surface level, Ted is like any other finance bro. He is a jerk, he is arrogant, he's full of himself, he looks down on people who have less than him. He is very just not like a kind person. But then you look underneath to understand that actually he does have redeeming qualities if you just look hard enough. He is loving, he is kind, he is struggling with his own insecurities coming from a lower class family background from Alaska, having to, have made his own way in this world. He's also trying to understand what it means to be in Wall Street and project these images of wealth to fit in, but then also feel like he can't really fully fit in as an Asian man. And you see these moments of vulnerability kind of punctured in, especially when the story is written from Ted's point of view. And I think this becomes really clear in one of my quotes from when we first meet Ted that I feel like really capture his essence really well. So the context for the scene is that Ella, Ted's wife, and Ted are having a conversation about Casey. Ted says, "Casey and her family are not my problems, Ella, and they're not yours either. Her sister can't take out loans from med school. He had just paid off the last of his education loans and was now putting aside money for his nephews." And I think this quote is so emblematic of Ted because you immediately see his awful side, that he's like, that's not my problem, she can't just do that, which is so presumptuous and making so many statements about somebody that I just think are really not cool. But at the same time, you see the soft, vulnerable side just kind of snuck in there of oh, but he's also saving for his nephews. It's not even his own children, it's nephews. It's his relative's kid. I think the other thing about Ted that's important to mention is the fact that the way Jin Lee describes him is really he's a hot dude, he's an attractive dude, and I think that's a very intentional choice because one, he's on Wall Street and unfortunately I think appearances do matter, but two, it's to fight back against the stereotype that Asian American men are ugly, they're unattractive, they're super nerdy, and that's all they really are, when there's a whole spectrum of people that may or may not fit that experience. The second way that I think this book does a really good job is in what it does for the coming of age genre. Now, in case you couldn't tell, coming of age is actually one of my favorite types of books to read, and Catcher in the Rye is actually one of my favorite books of all time. But while this book is amazing, incredible, huge J.D. Salinger stan, I also think that there are a lot of limitations, especially by white authors writing white coming-of-age stories, that I think don't fully capture the coming of age experience that at least I had as an Asian American. And the limitations really center around some of the things that Free Food for Millionaires actually does really well in talking about some of the struggles of Casey Han's journey to becoming a full-fledged adult. And so I will use 2 quotes from the book to highlight what I think this book does really well for the coming of age genre. Here's the first quote, and it's actually from the opening paragraphs of the book. Competence can be a curse. As a capable young woman, Casey Han felt compelled to choose respectability and success. But it was glamour and insight that she craved. A Korean immigrant who'd grown up in a dim, blue-collar neighborhood in Queens, she'd hoped for a brighter, fitting life beyond the workhorse struggle of her parents, who managed a Manhattan dry cleaner. She had a strong desire to be happy and to have love, and she'd never considered such wishes to be Korean ones. And if that isn't the story of a prototypical Asian American woman, at least me, I don't know what is, because it captures so much about the sacrifices that your parents have had to make to have a better life that you have now, and wanting to honor that sacrifice, of things like love and happiness not being particularly Korean wishes, but also being something that you want, either because it's inherent to you or because of the fact you were raised in America, and so now these are cultural expectations that you have. I also just love that line, competence can be a curse, because I think it's so true. It's also the opening line of the book. Because I think for so many of us, like Asian Americans, there's this model minority myth that we're supposed to be excellent and amazing and perfect at everything we do. But that can also be a curse, because that can really hold us back from truly expressing who we are, being vulnerable with each other, being imperfect with each other, and that really prevents us from accepting our whole humanity. Whew, that was a lot. And all this talk about coming of age and pressure and expectations is actually making me kind of thirsty. So let's go and take a break and make some tea, and then we'll come back and finish my thoughts on this book. Okay, that's better. I got my tea, and you got to watch me make some tea, which is cool. The last point that I want to make about why this book is so cool and so incredible is in how it handles class. And I think if you couldn't tell by the title, Free Food for Millionaires, that is probably one of the biggest and strongest themes of this book. So here's a quote that I think captures it really well. Clothing was magic. Every article suggested an image, a life, a kind of woman, and Casey felt drawn to them. When things were difficult, and they couldn't get much worse, Casey went to buy something to wear. When she had very little cash, purchasing a pair of black tights or a tube of lipstick from the drugstore could help her get through the slump. Everyone scrounged for an identity defined by objects. Casey does some really debatable and questionable things from a financial responsibility perspective, like staying at the Carlyle or buying expensive clothes or eating at these like expensive restaurants when she has literally no money in her bank account. When you read this quote, you understand why. Like, Casey wants to, like we saw earlier, just like be glamorous and happy and loved, and in many ways she thinks that can come from not only just being in this class, but also having all these things that can give her this identity that she really wants. And just being able to understand the psychology of somebody who is in many ways self-sabotaging themselves from a financial perspective, but then concretizing it in some of these actions, I think really help you understand some of the emotional challenges of class struggles and debt that a lot of Americans might be facing today, but is really hard to talk about, especially in the Asian American community. The second thing that I think this book does really well is it really captures what it's like to be in the world of the rich, and really understanding some of the contradictions of rich people's behavior, especially behavior that makes them really insecure about their money, even though they have so much money to share. We see this primarily in the story of Casey, because even when she is working as an investment banker, as she does later in the book, and investment bankers have these like really fancy like lifestyle, just like every single day, is very luxurious. She's very uncomfortable by this and is even taught to find ways to look out for herself and protect herself from it. Finally have the money to help other people, they're like, no, because obviously I have to look out for myself because that's how I got here in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of capitalism in America. And so now that we've talked a lot about the book itself, I now want to talk to you about the woman behind the book, Jin Lee, and all the things that she had to overcome and persevere to really get the story out. The first thing that really struck me was the fact that it took this woman 11 years to write this book, from the time she decided that she was going to be a writer to actually having this book written and edited and published. And through that, she had to weather so many things. She left her job as a corporate lawyer to focus on writing full-time, didn't have a lot of money, faced a ton of rejection, wrote 2 other novels before finally writing Free Food for Millionaires and having that be sold. And having to do this while overcoming a miscarriage and health problems, and that's just the stuff that we know. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that we don't even know about. So that is just an incredible testament to not only her talent as a writer, but also her tenacity as a human being. She was so dedicated towards getting this world right, and also this character of Ted right, that she actually sat in on HBS classes as a way to do research for her book, and then actually considered applying to Harvard Business School because she wanted to just be around these super confident people who thought that they could really change the world and make something of themselves. I also think that the reason why some of the narrative around class and wanting to be of a certain class but not having the means to be able to do that is so effective, because I think Min, and this is my personal theory, so take it with a grain of salt, but she had to overcome a lot of financial struggles to become a writer. She didn't end up getting an MFA because, again, didn't have a lot of money. Her husband was already supporting her, and as well as some other members of her family. And so she just took advantage of the fact that she lived in New York City and accessed as many free writing resources as she could. And I think that as writers, it's so hard. I mean, this day when you have the internet and access to all these resources. But imagine back in the 1990s and early 2000s when a lot of this information is limited, when you're a person who doesn't have a lot of means and not a lot of resources to be able to get to where you want to get to today, to put in that work for 11 years and then another 10 years for pachinko, that's an insane amount of grit, resilience, and dedication, and really inspirational as another Asian American author. I know I've talked about this a bunch, but 11 years of rejection is a lot of rejection. I recently started taking writing seriously in 2021, and I've had 1 story out, and I've probably received 100 rejections, which you can see here. And it's been so hard. Every other week, I'm why am I doing this? What's the point of this? And her being so open about her journey has just given me so much perspective about the resilience that you need in order to really make it as a creative. And in some ways, that resilience is really intimidating because I don't know if I have it on many days, but it gives me a lot of comfort to know that if I'm resilient enough, maybe I'll make it somewhere. And maybe that's all I really need to do and focus on, instead of feeling this need that I need to have this elusive thing called talent that I don't even know if it grows on trees, or maybe I wasn't born with it or something. And so I think just having that realistic perspective is really helpful. So much for watching this video, and if any elements of Free Food for Millionaires, Jin Lee's journey, my own journey resonated with you, would love to hear it in the comments below. Until then, stay curious, stay hydrated, and I will see you next time.